Welcome to the Genealogy Gems Podcast. It's a show filled with family history research strategies and techniques, news and entertainment, and inspiration. And I'm your host, Lisa Louise Cooke. Hello, and welcome to Genealogy Gems Podcast episode number 163. And this is the last one coming to you from sunny California. I almost can't believe it. I am just back from the Christmas holidays, and which we, of course, spent in Texas, but we're back here in California. I've got a couple of presentations to wrap up here in the great state of California, and then we're heading south in the end of January, and that'll be full-time out to the Dallas, Texas area. So really what I'm in is my office, which may sound a little more echoey because there's about half of the stuff is gone, and the most critical pieces left to keep moving Genealogy Gems forward are still here, and they're the last to go. But otherwise, we're down to about a couch and a love seat and a bed. I think there's a picture or two on the walls, clothes in the closet. But all the basics are here. Everything else has already made its way down to Texas. And we did have a great time over the holidays. I certainly hope that you did as well with your family. We had two of our three daughters with us. Of course, our oldest daughter lives down the Dallas, Texas area. And of course, Davy and Joey, our grandkids, were there with us for the holidays. And my youngest daughter, Hannah, who lives up in Missouri, who is getting married this May. In May of 2014, she and her fiance came down to spend the Christmas with us. So this was really a heartbreaking one for us because it was the first time that one of our daughters wasn't there with us for Christmas. And of course, our daughter Lacey is still here in California, and she had lots of obligations and things going on here. So she didn't make it down to Texas, but it was really different in that respect. It's just amazing that things just keep changing. I know that happens in your family too. And so you know what I'm talking about. But one of the things that happened over Christmas, which was not so great, was I threw my back out. And this is an ongoing issue. And of course, I guess I can blame my oldest daughter for this. Not the one that happened at this Christmas, but back when she was a baby, about 6 months old, I leaned over and forward to pull her out of a car seat. And that was the first time that it snapped, and it's been going out off and on over the years ever since. I guess I have what they call a bulging disc. Ugh, sounds awful in my lower back. But really interesting to learn that even my back pain is family history related. And this is an area we haven't actually talked about that much here on Genealogy Gems Podcast, but that is how the role that family history plays in your health. And this was really providential because before we left for Texas, we got together with my uncle and Lacey here in California. We got together for dinner, kind of a Christmas get-together dinner before we headed for Texas. And my uncle and I were talking, and I said, oh, God, somehow it came up about back pain. And I said, oh, I remember back in the 70s, he was living in Palo Alto at that time, and he had thrown his back out. He must have been in bed for a month. And I said, I don't remember a lot from that time frame, but I sure remember the pain that you were in and that you had thrown your back out. And, it's been quite a while since I've thrown mine out. And I said, I wonder if that's hereditary. And he looked at me, he says, well, your grandmother had back surgery not long after that happened to me. I didn't know that. And I was very close to my grandmother, but see, we didn't live near each other. So I guess it makes sense that a kid didn't really tune into everything that was going on. But I had gone to visit my uncle in person, so I saw him laying there in pain, but I didn't realize that my grandmother, Burkett, had suffered from back pain, and not just suffered from it, she'd actually gone in and had back surgery back in the 70s, which I can only imagine what that would be like, because I know how much it's progressed since then. And in fact, my uncle told me, he says, I almost had back surgery, but I got together with a doctor who said, I think we can take some other routes to get you back up on your feet, which they did. And I have found over time that by doing the right things, which sometimes we don't always do, I can certainly get back up on my feet. And although this episode of me throwing my back out at Christmas was one of the worst that's ever happened. I actually recovered the fastest that I've ever recovered. But let me just say, in hearing this story about my grandmother, it got me to thinking about the photographs that I have of her mother, Louise. And my great-grandmother, I would say in 50% at least of the photographs of her, and I have many photographs of her, she's standing there with her hands on her hips. Now, I know that the ladies in my family are an opinionated sort, and I kind of figured that was just part of her personality. But as I get older, I find myself doing the same thing all the time. And I'm looking at those pictures so differently now, thinking that may not be as much of a sassy attitude as that is a little bit of back pain. And her daughter, of course, was my grandmother. So I wouldn't be surprised. It really gets you thinking about how family history is so critical to an understanding of your own personal health. And we've seen that not long ago. In fact, it was Angelina Jolie, of course, a very famous movie star who had a double mastectomy in order to just prevent the possibility of breast cancer because it had been so devastating in her own family history. And of course, everybody makes their own personal choice, but that is one of my targets this year, is I'm going to really be sitting down and creating a separate chart that really does chart out the family history. We'll have to see if we can get some folks on the show to chat more about that, because I think that that's so important. And certainly good health is an awful good way to start the new year. And I can just tell you, I didn't do anything wild and crazy. Well, no, I did do something wild and crazy. I helped my husband with moving all of this stuff down to Texas, and we did this ourselves. Oh my gosh, the man got in this 22-foot long moving truck and drove to Texas from California with a one-night stay in, Western Texas? And he made it in 2 days flat. I flew. I thought I was being smart. I was, protecting my back because bouncing around that big old truck didn't sound like a lot of fun. And of course, he took our dog Howie with him. Well, he got down there. We got everything moved. The kids came and they helped. So I didn't, strain too bad. But I did do a lot of work the day before Christmas, unloading for 6 hours boxes of china and stuff that I needed to be able to set up the Christmas dinner, which all went great. Now, is that when my back went out? No. It went out the day after Christmas. While I heard my husband rummaging around, he was sorting out all the leftover paper and stuff and trying to get through all the trash. So I went in there to grab a box and kind of go through and pull out the bows and separate out the plastic and the paper. And I reached down to grab a piece of wrapping paper, and that was it. I was done. It was over. And I was in really bad shape. Unfortunately, the next day, we had plans. We already had an appointment to go and take Hannah to pick out her wedding dress. And wild horses couldn't have kept me away from doing that. I was still moving at that point. I was still being able to walk around, and I was in pain, but I could deal with it. And of course, that was probably the worst thing I probably could have done, because I ended up in the emergency room the next night. But thank goodness, medicine has come a long way, and I am up and running. I'm getting ready to hit the road now that it's January. I'll be heading down to San Diego this weekend to do some presentations, and we've got lots of things coming up, so I cannot afford to be on my back too long. So I'm really glad that kind of healed itself, but very interesting to see the tie into family history for me. We'll definitely put that on our list of things to talk about this year. The family history of our health. And, one of the other things I got to, and this is just totally random. You just have to bear with me. It's a new year. What the heck? I haven't totally focused myself on what I want to do, but I was watching the news. I'm sure you probably came across it a couple times over the holidays. And, I was watching the reports of the Nelson Mandela funeral. And Barack Obama was there, and he was speaking, and so were all of these other dignitaries. And you probably heard the story about the deaf interpreter, the man who was doing the sign language for all of those. He wasn't doing sign language. He was supposed to be doing the sign language for all of these great leaders of the world and doing that for the deaf audience. But it turns out he didn't know sign language. Or if he did, it wasn't operating that day because it was total gibberish. And I got to thinking, they figured that out pretty quickly, obviously. And that was a whole brouhaha of its own. But I got to thinking, video today is so much like the old movies of yesterday, or the photographs that, began in the 19th century. We're celebrating the 175th anniversary of the daguerreotype actually this year. And I got to thinking how we tend to look at photographs or old films and you just take it as, well, that's the way it was, right? And I'm thinking, how would that film of footage of that event be interpreted 100 years from now? If the news of the day, which comes and goes so quickly now, gets lost in the passing of time, and 100 years from now, the historians are looking at this going, what is that man saying? These people must have had a whole different language for sign language. I mean, you can imagine the conclusions you could jump to so easily. I just think it's hysterical because it's a really good reminder that what we see in old photos and old videos or old film footage isn't always necessarily correct or true or exact or what else. It just, what a great reminder. It's kind of funny to think about how folks might interpret the history we're making today, 100 years from now or 200 years from now or however long it is. They may just be looking at us and scratching their heads. That could be. I don't know, but I just thought that was very humorous. We have some genealogy news that did occur over the holidays, so we'll be talking about that and also checking at the mailbox. First off, I want to tell you about, get this, talk about making news. iTunes hit 1 billion podcast subscribers just a few months ago. I just came across this, and amazing how many people are out there still subscribing to podcasts. And although you don't hear about podcasting as much as you might hear about radio shows or whatever, it's really the same thing, except for it puts the listener in control. As you well know, you're a podcast listener. But I think the reason why podcasting sustains and is actually growing at this kind of rate is because it really is the democratization of media. It's the opportunity for people who have an idea to get out there and talk about it and to, in a sense, pull together the friends and those who would be friends around the world who might be interested in the same topic and can tune in. I just think it's incredible. So congratulations to iTunes for 1 billion podcast subscriptions. It's been really exciting to be a part of that. I mean, podcasting didn't exist prior to 2005, really. And we started here in early February of 2007 with the Genealogy Gems Podcast. So definitely in the early Wild West days of podcasting. And we are actually, we crossed the 1 million download mark. We are actually fast approaching the 1.5 million episode download mark. Pretty amazing. I'll have a link in the show notes. I did a blog post on this because it was really interesting when I heard the news about iTunes to take a little closer look at the stats on this show itself, the reach that it has around the world. I have a map there in the blog post you can take a look at, but truly this podcast has reach around the world, and we're thrilled that all of you around the world are listening. And it also ranks. Where are the most listeners? Where are the least listeners? In what method are you using? iTunes obviously is the number one way in which people access the podcast. But we have a lot of people who listen through their browsers. I noticed Chrome was way up there, and Firefox, and certainly lots of mobile devices. That is growing by leaps and bounds because people are not only using tablets, but they're using their smartphones to listen and stream the show. And of course, our apps. We've got apps in all the different ways. And that brings me to another piece of news. We are celebrating our 4th anniversary of the Genealogy Gems Podcast app. Yay! And thank you so much, because so many of you have downloaded the app, and that's the way you listen. And you can stream the show, and you can access the show notes and contact me and send emails. It's awesome. And I am so glad that you've taken advantage of it. And we're just excited that we're available across all the different platforms, and certainly you can grab that podcast app. If you're not already using it, you can get it for Windows, for Android, for iTunes, for Apple. Do all of that through the website, and of course, you can find that in our newsletter as well. So lots of big milestones going on these days. Now, one of the other things we've been doing lately is we've been reaching back into the past and republishing the Family History Genealogy Made Easy podcast. If you've been a listener for a while, of course, you remember that show, and there was such a demand for it to come back. We wanted to move it off of the previous website that it was part of and get it on our own platform, which we are doing now. And we just published, we've published episodes 9, 10, 11, and 12, probably since the last time we spoke. And we decided not to republish 13. So if you look at the iTunes feed and you say, where is episode 13? What is she doing? Maybe her back was out that week. No, it's just that as we've gone through and remastered these episodes, we update the links. We make sure that it's still, relevant. And funny enough, episode 13 was essentially irrelevant. Nearly every service and website that we talked about no longer exists. Interesting. Maybe it's just bad luck for number 13. But for whatever reason, we realized it just really wasn't worth republishing. And I don't want to send people in odd directions looking for websites that no longer exist. But I can tell you that we had some really cool stuff in episodes 9 and 10, and these are all available for free through iTunes. You can also listen to them straight from the Genealogy Gems website, genealogygems.com. In episode 9, we cover a group of records that are really critical, obviously, to family history research. And those are the U.S. federal census records. In that episode, you're not only going to learn about what you're going to find in the regular enumeration schedules, but you're going to learn about the enumerators, the instructions that they followed, and the special sections like the economic census. And then we go straight to the source. We talked to Bill Morey. He is the Chief of History Staff at the U.S. Census Bureau. He certainly was at the time we did the episode. I talked to him about the history section of the Census Department's website. This is a really cool website if you haven't already checked it out. So episode 9 will tell you all about that. And also in episode number 10, we continue on that U.S. federal census theme by pushing further back in time and following the census breadcrumb trail, which of course is so critical to our family history research. And then in that episode, we get together with one of my favorite people. We explore census enumerations that really often get overlooked. Beyond population schedules, there are so many others, and we do that with family historian Curt Witcher. He is the manager of the nationally recognized Genealogy Center at the Allen County Public Library in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Curt is very well known for his genealogy lectures, and he has some great tips for tapping into more obscure census resources. So we talk about those non-population schedules and also census substitutes for some missing census data like the 1890 census. And we also touch on state censuses that might be available as well. So those were some of my favorite episodes. So those are all available now on the Family History Genealogy Made Easy podcast. And let's see right around the corner, Roots Tech is just about here. It starts up February of 2014. And they have announced an all-star lineup of keynote speakers. They are really hoping to inspire people to discover and share their stories and make those family history connections. And I think they really want to reach out and pull in people who have not yet explored their family history. And they're doing that with a little more non-traditional genealogy keynote speakers. Top on the list is Ree Drummond. She's the blogger and author, and of course known as the Pioneer Woman on her TV series on the Food Network. She's going to be there talking. And of course, when you first see that, you think, well, I love Ree Drummond, but I don't really think of her in terms of genealogy. Well, she certainly is a mom, and she's somebody who's reaching into the past in terms of being a pioneer woman and teaching people about cooking and photography and stories about country life. And I think that she will help bridge that gap, it seems like, between the non-genealogist and the genealogist. I think we can all be inspired there. They're also going to have Annalise Van de Belt. She's the CEO of DC Thompson Family History, and you think probably of them as findmypast.com. And Judy Russell, blogger and professional genealogist. She's known as the legal genealogist. She's going to be talking about the interplay between genealogy and the law. And then somebody who spoke at Jamboree last year, Dr. Spencer Wells. He's the project director for the National Geographic Genographic Project. Does some really cool stuff with DNA. He's a great speaker. And Todd Hansen, I don't know if you've seen the show. It's called The Story Trek. It's on BYU television. I noticed that it's actually on our cable channel here in California. I just came across it the other day. His theory is that behind every door, there is a story. So in his television series, he randomly goes door to door and asks people, hey, can I interview you, and discover who lives behind those doors and their real stories, kind of collecting the future history today. Kind of cool stuff. That's Todd Hansen. And Stephanie Nielsen. She's a blogger and author of Vanini Dialogues. She has an incredible story of survival and recovery after a plane crash. Can you imagine? And she's inspired people. She's talked on Oprah Winfrey's show and the Today Show, and she'll be there with an inspirational message, certainly. So it's not too late. I'm going to be there at Roots Tech. I hope that you consider registering and coming on out to Salt Lake City. It's going to be held February 6th through the 8th at the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City, Utah, here in 2014. And there'll be over 200 classes. And as I mentioned to you, my friend Kurt Witcher and I got together and helped the program team this year. We worked on the program committee developing the program. I hope you'll be happy with it. I'm excited. I'm going to be doing a lot of classes and have a booth there in the expo hall, as we always do. The expo hall itself is so amazing. It's worth going. So check that out. We've got links for you in the show notes. And real quick, I wanted to mention to you, we've talked about Pinterest here on the show in the past. That's that kind of virtual bulletin board online at Pinterest.com that's free, where you can just pin all kinds of cool stuff that you find online. It's very focused on imagery, but you can check out Pinterest.com/Lisa Louise Cooke just to kind of see how it works. And I've got lots of family history themed boards there on my Pinterest boards. But if you are a Pinterest user, there's some really good news. People really clamored for wanting what they call secret boards. Not everything you pin you want to necessarily share with the universe, right? And in the past, they've recently allowed you to have 3 boards that you could have that were private. And you could invite other people to share them with you. So here's an example. My daughter Hannah is getting married. Well, she and I have been pinning all kinds of ideas for dresses and flowers and food and all that kind of stuff, but she doesn't want her fiance to see what we're planning. So she created a private Pinterest board, invited me to share with her, and then we both can post, and then her bridesmaids can get involved as well. But they come to realize very quickly that people said, 3 is not enough. So if you're a Pinterest user, you now get 3 more secret boards. So there's a total of, at least as far as I know, 6 boards are now available to you. You haven't been on Pinterest for a while. You can certainly set up a few more if you'd like to. And you can still invite people to participate with you. But it's a great way to collect inspiring ideas and things that maybe you don't have a chance to take action right now, but it's nice to have them in one place so you can go to. I particularly like doing my family history projects in terms of displays and inspiration and that kind of thing. Projects I want to do, but maybe I don't have time right this minute. It's a great place to do that. And we've covered so much already, but I know I want to check in with you guys at the mailbox, so let's head on over there right now.
From my old hometown, one with some jokes from my old pal Jim Brown. Bring me a letter from that girl of mine, saying that she's longing for me all the time. Bring me a letter from my proud old dad, who knows that we
couple of items here I want to share with you in the mailbox. The first one comes to us from Keith, and he wrote, I previously wrote you a few months ago when I launched my own blog, sonofswift.tumblr.com. I am happy to report that tomorrow marks my 150th post. Thank you for reading my first message on your show. I've since listed it on Genia bloggers and started a weekly picture post, Wordless Wednesday. After spending a considerable amount of time trying to break down brick walls, I'm currently focused on learning about my and my wife's great-grandparents, which I call thickening the branch. Well, congratulations, Keith. I remember talking about your blog here on the show, and wow, 150 posts. You know, it's one thing to get started. It's another thing to hang in there and keep doing it. And every time you post, you're getting great content out there on the web that can be found and picked up by people who are searching in Google. I can just imagine the connections that will lead to down the road for you. So that is very cool. And in fact, Keith followed up with me and he said, in the new year, I plan on releasing ebooks containing all my research from the past 6 months with accompanying trees. All of it is thanks to guidance I get from listening to your podcast. Thank you for all you've done and will continue to do. And I have a suggestion for you, Keith. I think he's a premium member. And if you are a premium member and you are interested in maybe doing something like this that Keith is talking about, which I think is a fantastic idea. Ebooks, what a great way to get info out. And that way you can update them really easily as you find new information. Check out, we have a series of podcast episodes on doing your own publishing on a website called Lulu, which I use to do publishing as well. And there's some videos that accompany those podcast episodes so you can really see step by step. It can be a little daunting to get out there and do your first publishing, but I've got some great resources there for you in the premium area. So check those out. And our next two messages and emails that I have here actually pertain to our first gem in this episode. Marianne wrote in and she says, sitting here addressing Christmas cards and grabbing a bit of lunch when I decided to check my email. I spotted your email, and she's talking about the free Genealogy Gems e-newsletter, and I opened it up. Skimmed through it, went back to the top again to check out more of what you wrote about the Roots Tech 2014 Flipboard magazine that you put together. Looked over at the stack of cards, still waiting, but thought I'd grab a few minutes to just get it downloaded. Thanks to your book, I think she's talking about how to turn your iPad into a genealogy powerhouse. She says, I already have and use Flipboard, so it didn't take long to find the magazine and subscribe. It looks fantastic, she says in caps. Can hardly wait to sit down and spend time reading through the articles and watching the videos. Right now, though, that stack of cards is shouting at me, so I'd better set aside my iPad. After reading your book, I chose a mini and forever grateful for the help that your book gave me, especially in setting up my apps, and get back to those cards. Well, this is really cool. Now, she's talking about the newsletter that we sent out in December, where I launched this new Roots Tech 2014 magazine. It's free, and it's in Flipboard. And that is what our first gem is going to be all about. And if you didn't get the newsletter, first of all, if you're not getting the newsletter, but you have signed up for it, do a couple things. Check to see if it's showing up if you're in Gmail in your promotions tab. In any service, check the junk or the spam folder, because that can happen sometimes when it's a newsletter type format, and mark it as not spam. You can also add our email address to your contact list, which helps your email provider know that it's okay to receive the email, and that's genealogygemspodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't already gotten on the list, you can do it for free over at the website, and you get a little free ebook for doing so as a kind of a gift. But we also have a blog post on this Roots Tech 2014 magazine, and it's free to everybody. So whether you're going to Roots Tech or not, you'll enjoy it because it's packed full of great genealogy blog posts and videos and all kinds of great information. It's also kind of meant to inspire folks to get excited about what's possible and what's coming up in the new conference this year. And I, of course, was thinking about that because I was working on the program committee. And also, I just thought it was a great example of a way to show you the possibilities of what Flipboard could do in terms of interfacing with your genealogy and your family history efforts. So, Marianne, I'm thrilled that you loved it. I'll have a link to it in the show notes for all the rest of you if you haven't checked it out yet. And I have one more note here from Tanya, who also wrote in about it. She says, I've had Flipboard on my smartphone, and I didn't know what to do with it. Just subscribe to the Roots Tech magazine, and it looks wonderful. Thank you so much. Looks like I better learn a little bit more about Flipboard. Well, Tanya, we're going to take care of you today because that's our first gem, and that's coming up right after this.
From my proud old dad, who knows that we are winning, and I'll bet he's glad. But more than any other, a line from my old mother. Bring me a letter from my hometown.
I've got some great news for all you genealogists out there. Roots Magic 6 is now available, and it offers some of the most customer-requested features, like online publishing, the ability to search every record, not just people, an editable timeline view, which is really incredible, and new web tags, which lets you link people, sources, places, and research log items to web pages, plus dozens of other great enhancements, and of course, all the built-in features that you've come to enjoy. There is a little something here for everyone. Now, if you're already a devoted Roots Magic user like I am, or if you're looking to take the next step in your family history research and finally start recording your family tree in your own genealogy database, or if you've just been wanting to make a switch to a much more user-friendly program, there's no better time to get your copy of Roots Magic 6. Do it now. Go to rootsmagic.com and download your risk-free trial of Roots Magic 6. You'll see why professionals and beginners alike choose Roots Magic at rootsmagic.com. If you've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, or you've gone back and caught up on the previous episodes, like I know many of you have written and told me that you've done, then you know that I was a big advocate of iGoogle as a way to stay organized online. And one of the things I used to love to organize were all my favorite podcasts, blogs, genealogy videos, all of them having to do with family history and genealogy. And I say used to because back in November 2013, as you know, Google did away with iGoogle, much to my dismay. They want their users to focus over on Google+, which frankly is not a favorite of mine. In fact, I was just reading the other day that Google's CEO was saying that they made a really big mistake in underestimating social media online, and that's put them in a position of kind of constantly having to play catch-up. And unfortunately, I think that Google Plus kind of shows that. But anyway, it didn't take long to track down some great alternatives to iGoogle. And in this gem, I want to focus in on one that I flipped out over for tracking and enjoying my favorite online media, like blogs and videos. And it's called Flipboard. And if you have my book, Turn Your iPad into a Genealogy Powerhouse, as we mentioned before, then you're probably already familiar with the free app. Now wait, don't turn off this episode just because you don't have an iPad. You don't need one to use and enjoy Flipboard. It's a free app, and it's available both on the Apple and the Android side. So for all of those devices, we're talking about all kinds of smartphones and tablets. They can all use it. Now, while the app allows you to pull together, of course, all your favorite RSS feeds and displays them in a really beautiful way, Flipboard also has what they call the magazine feature. And in a recent issue, of course, as I mentioned, of the free Genealogy Gems e-newsletter, which you can sign up for at the homepage, I wrote an article all about a magazine that I created all by my little self using the free Flipboard web tools. These magazines, and I really call them magazine issues because they're more like a standalone issue of a magazine than an ongoing subscription to a magazine. But these magazines can be viewed on your computer web browser as well as the app. So there, if you don't even have a smartphone or a mobile device of any type, you could still take advantage of Flipboard magazines with your web browser on your computer. And you can add content yourself from all over the web and share it with other people as well. Well, when I saw the magazine feature for the first time, my mind just started racing with all the genealogical possibilities. I've already created several free magazines that you can enjoy, and I'll tell you more about how to access those at the end of this segment. But first, we're going to head to the Silicon Valley and meet with the folks at Flipboard to get an up-close and personal look at the company, the app, and those awesome magazines. In this interview, I travel to Flipboard's offices in Palo Alto, California. It's the home of a few names that you might recognize, like Facebook. And I meet up with Todd Lapin. He is on Flipboard's editorial team, and he runs their new blog that's focused on how to discover great content and include it in Flipboard. And he also runs their Mag Makers Twitter handle. So here's my conversation with Todd Lapin of Flipboard. Well, with the demise of iGoogle and Google Reader, we're all looking for something new and innovative to help us bring web content to us, the stuff that we want, and to curate that content. And one of my absolute favorite apps is Flipboard. You know, I've been talking about it in my book, How to Turn Your iPad into a Genealogy Powerhouse. And one of the apps that I featured quite a bit in that book, and certainly I've talked about on the podcast, is Flipboard. And being a San Francisco area resident, I have the wonderful pleasure to come over here to the Silicon Valley to Palo Alto, California, and meet with the folks at Flipboard. And here, meeting with us today is Todd Lapin, and he is on the editorial team at Flipboard, runs their new blog focused on discovery of content at magazines.flipboard.com, and of course also their Mag Makers Twitter handle. Hi, Todd.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to be here. And Carolyn is joining us as well. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for pulling all this together. And Todd, you know, of course I have a million questions, so you're not going to go away very easy on this, but let's just start at the beginning, which is, what is Flipboard? If you get caught in an elevator with somebody and they say, what is that? How do you explain it to them?
Well, the first thing I always say is that Flipboard is one of the things that's very hard to explain but very easy to understand once you actually see it. But I'll give it a try. Flipboard is what we call a social magazine, which is to say it takes a lot of the sort of content that many people tend to consume online anyway, your social feeds, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, a lot of the sort of things that we do to sort of that reflect our online life, and it sort of pulls that content together into an app, which then presents that information so that it looks and feels a lot like a traditional magazine. So the easy way I always, in the elevator version, is if you can imagine your Twitter feed or your Facebook feed looking like a magazine and you interact with it like a magazine, that's actually a pretty good sense of what Flipboard does.
Yeah, and I would even add to that, and probably the place and the way in which I use it most is with blogs. You know, it's a fabulous platform for bringing blogs in and actually curating the ones that I want to follow. And we're going to be talking more about that. But you're here in Palo Alto. Tell me, why are all high-tech companies in Palo Alto?
They're in Palo Alto. This is sort of I think it has to do with a long history of Silicon Valley, which is a very interesting story, and I don't think there's any clear answer. But it's a confluence of things. Silicon Valley was traditionally a very heavy, dense in the aerospace industry in the 50s and 60s, and as that industry started specifically tending to focus on the avionics, the electronics within the aerospace industry, and that sort of Hewlett-Packard was based here, which was, of course, at that time largely focused on scientific instruments. And so we ended up here with a high concentration of people who specialized in that industry, throw in a little bit of venture capital, and about 30 years later, a lot of the areas that used to be prune orchards are now covered with corporate campuses, and we have Silicon Valley as we now know it.
Yes, my grandmother used to come over here and cut cots, as she would say. Apricots was the big thing. That was where their summer work was. So what you're saying is that the genealogy of the high-tech industry really goes farther back, way beyond computers, into aerospace. And it makes sense. You've got some very talented people here, certainly in your DNA. Where did the idea for Flipboard come from? There's a lot of social media websites out there, and there's so many apps. Where did it come from, and why do you think it's kind of risen up to the top above all the noise?
The idea came from our founder, Mike McHugh, and the basic version of it, and all these things don't have a very simple story really, but we all come up with simple ways to tell them, is the notion that he really was sort of dissatisfied with the way the web felt. That if you look at an average web page right now, you'll have an article, but then you'll have a banner on the top, and you'll have 4 kind of ads interspersed along the side. The upside is that the web has become sort of very cluttered, and that really sort of gets in the way of the content. And he really wanted to sort of imagine, right around the time when the iPhone had just come out and the iPad had not yet come out, if you were to really rethink the idea of a browser for digital content without sort of the legacy of what the web browser had become, if you really were to sort of start with a clean slate of paper and imagine how would you like to surf digital content or how would you like to consume digital content, he was drawn towards the beauty and simplicity of print, and Flipboard is a reflection of that.
And what has kind of blown me away in just working with it is how simply and easily you can pull content in and give it this amazing format that I'm sure I write for Family Tree magazine, and of course they spend months putting together the layout and making everything perfect, and there's a huge job that comes together on the print side, and here you guys just pull that content right in and lay it all out. I want to get right to it. Let's start flipping content.
Sure.
What is the best way to locate content? And I'd like to focus a bit. We certainly have listeners who use Facebook, who use Twitter, but we're really interested in genealogy blogs, not only for our ongoing education, stay in tune with who's talking about important stuff out there, but also I'm encouraging my listeners all the time to blog, because this is essentially cousin bait. This is how we get our story out and get found in Google so that other cousins can track us down and we can get together in our family history. So let's say that there are a couple of blogs that we think we'd like to follow. Maybe there's an archive or a library across the country who puts out great ongoing content about what they're doing. I want to stay in touch with that. How do I bring that into Flipboard?
Well, the way that you would sort of find specialized content that you're looking for is through the search box, which is at the top of most pages on both if you're using a smartphone, Android or iOS or a tablet.
In your app, in the Flipboard app.
Within the Flipboard app, exactly. And from there, what we usually suggest is to start typing in some combination of things. You'll get different results, but depending on what you type, you could just type genealogy and see what comes up. But if you do have a specific blog that you like to use, just type that into the search bar. Well, we usually have most things that are blogs that you can subscribe to them. Subscribing is free. It literally just means you sort of are agreeing you want to follow it. You can subscribe to almost anything you find on Flipboard. And most blogs are there. What we tend to do is by default pick up the RSS feed, which is the sort of the syndication feed for most blogs, and you'll find that it will appear on Flipboard. And again, the blog that you're used to will suddenly look like a magazine, which is tends to be, when you see that for the first time, especially if it's a site that you're familiar with. It's even stranger when it's your own site. It's a pretty cool experience. It's everything is kind of familiar, a bit more sexy, and the interface is very different, but it's a very nice look and feel.
Great. So we go into the App Store, we download the free Flipboard app, I assume we're going to sign up and get ourselves a free account so we have something unique to us. And then I see here, we're looking at your iPad, you've got the search box, so you've typed in genealogy, and like everyone, you have misspelled it, but understandably so. That's okay. Genealogy. It does not spell like it sounds. Okay, so he's getting genealogy in there, and let's see what happens. Okay, so we're seeing Twitter feeds, MyHeritage, Family Search, Ancestry, very familiar names. Then we get into Facebook and Google+. Are we also going to find blogs in this search results list?
We'll find some, but search on Flipboard is a little unusual, especially if you're used to dealing with Google. Google is really searching the whole web. What Flipboard is really searching is we do a little bit of searching of content, the content that's already on Flipboard. So if you type in genealogy, we will surface the articles by recency that are already that people have shared into our content network. But in general, the pervasive way that you search for content on Flipboard is by source. So what Flipboard is really doing is we're finding the sources that are about the subjects that you type. Either they're about the topic or the name itself is part of the brand name of whatever the content source is.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. So in terms of search, you might actually type in specifically, if we did my blog, Genealogy Gems. So if I type in the actual name, if I could spell it, is that going to detect that there's a blog on my website?
Yeah, let's look. So
okay, so I see the podcast. Yeah,
yep,
Genealogy Gems Podcast.
There's the podcast. Right, it pulls up. So we search by Flipboard organizes searches by, as I said, it's really about helping you find sources, and then we organize those sources by what network they came from. So,
and it makes perfect sense because although the blog is called Genealogy Gems, the URL is lisalouisecooke.com, and that may be why it doesn't show up as blog.
That could be why. Your podcast is showing up here, and it looks like it did not pick up the RSS feed. And
well, that brings us to the browser.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I'm on my laptop, I'm on my desktop computer, or I'm even in, Safari on my iPad, and I'm looking in a browser. I can flip if I go to a blog site that I know about, and I know they've got an RSS feed, I could flip it from a browser, and that would save it into Flipboard, would it not?
Yes, you could do that.
Okay. So let's see here. I know that I've added the Flip It little icon to my Safari browser, which we can do, and that's something that we'll talk about in the premium podcast, and I'll give you some step-by-step instructions on how to add the Flip It icon to the browser. But on the web browser, can we just go to flipboard.com, or do we need to actually have the tool as part of our browser?
So Flipboard, let's back up for a minute. One of the things that Flipboard allows you to do is, yes, you can search for content, you can search for sources, but you also have the ability to create your own collections that we call magazines. We call them magazines because they look like magazines.
Like magazines, yeah.
But it's a very familiar concept. A lot of sites let you do that right now, where you sort of see things, content that you want, and you flip it into a magazine of your choosing. You can make multiple magazines on Flipboard. They're all free. For all intents and purposes, you can make an unlimited number of them. So that's the basic idea, that you sort of create a magazine around a topic or a theme.
And that's what the Flip It tool is actually setting them into. If I had the RSS feed for a single particular blog, and maybe it didn't come up in the search box, but I know the RSS feed, could I manually add that into my app?
If you manually search for it, that usually works. So if you manually search for the RSS, for the URL of an RSS feed, it may just be that nobody searched for it before, so we don't find it, because we learn from our own users as to where they want to go. But if you do have the URL, if you just type the URL into the search box, that usually will pull it up.
Great. You mentioned magazines, and absolutely, this is kind of where I want to go in this conversation, because I think they are such a wonderful way to curate content. And I know so far I can show you, okay, I've already got 4 magazines. Let me see what my magazines are here. Well, that's the Flipboard app. I pulled them up in the editor. Tell us real quickly, okay, here we go. I've got 5 of them. Mason jar mania. Who knew that somebody was totally into old mason jars and what you could do with them? I know, it's ridiculous. And then I have one just on the family tree. Things that have to do with building your family tree. Then we've got a magazine that revolves around Roots Tech. the major national conference that happens every year in terms of genealogy. And then, of course, I have one of my own that I follow, which is just technology. That being my specialty, it's this and everything else. It doesn't have to be genealogy. And then I've got one simply called Genealogy Gems, where I'm pulling content from all the different types of sources, my YouTube channel, all that kind of thing. This is happening at the website. This is editor.flipboard.com. Maybe you could walk us through in the simple way of how does a person set up their first magazine, and where do we do that?
So, yeah, the first thing to understand is that Flipboard, for the moment, is still primarily an app that happens to have some capabilities on the web. So that's one thing that's a little different. Initially, at first, a little disorienting to people that, right. Most things sort of started out as websites and they became apps. And we're moving the other direction. We've started out an app and we're increasingly moving the functionality that's present within the web right now to the app. I'm sorry, to the web. The way this works, we'll start within the app. If you're using Flipboard and you've one thing that's very important, that's really important to emphasize, is that in order to create magazines, you must create an account, which is free. It's very fast and easy, but it's a step that's very easy for people to overlook because they want to go create a magazine and they're not seeing how, and the reason why they're not seeing it is because they haven't created a magazine. Once you created an account, you'll see on almost every piece of content within Flipboard, you'll see a small plus sign in a box that appears alongside the piece of content. If you tap that plus sign,
are we talking in the app?
Within the app, if you tap that plus sign, that will then give you the option to create a magazine, and creating a magazine is as simple as just giving it a name, basically.
So you can create magazines within the app. You don't have to go to the editor online.
Correct. It's very possible to never use the web and stay within Flipboard. In fact, for a lot of us here, when we were just sort of testing out magazines, that we did that. So that works okay. So you give the magazine a name, give it a description if you'd like, and you're basically done. If you have multiple magazines and you try and flip a piece of content into one of your magazines, there's a chooser that goes up and it shows the covers of your magazines, and you just tap whichever magazine you want it to go to. Very straightforward. Now, there is also a tool that we call the web editor, which is what you're referring to, which is it's a bit of a as a curator, gives you more control than you would have within the app. What the web editor lets you do is arrange the order of the stories within the magazine. So if you have
that was one of my first burning desires, was to try to get them a little bit reorganized and have some ideas about.
You flip them in and you flip stories into a magazine in chronological order, but that's not necessarily the best editorial order. Okay. So having the ability to rearrange the order is a nice thing. You can do this within the app, but it's a little bit even easier on the web. You can choose the cover image. You can choose what image appears on the cover of the magazine. And one thing we should mention, you know this, of course, because you've seen it, is that the covers on Flipboard tend to be really, really beautiful. It's one of the really, really lovely things about the app is when you see some picture that you've seen a million times, and suddenly it looks like a magazine cover. It's a real jaw-dropping experience. So you could choose what image you want as the cover, and of course, if you put something in a magazine by accident, you can delete it. You can just remove it from the magazine. So the web editor provides a lot of tools that give the magazine curator a lot more control over how the magazine and the content within the magazine is presented.
Great. I have a couple of magazine questions here. What's the easiest way to locate other people's magazines if I want to subscribe to somebody else's?
Well, yeah, the easiest way to locate other people's magazines is to search by topic. Just to think in terms of what would be some words, sort of like a keyword search. What are the kind of words that somebody would likely use either in the title of their magazine or in the description of their magazine? And again, once you type that into the search box, one of your search options is search for magazines, and that will usually pull that up.
Can you show me that?
Sure. We did that. Here's genealogy, just straight up the word genealogy. And what you see here almost right away here's 3 magazines called Genealogy, created by other people. And then there's even more. You'll see 3 that are sort of the 3 that tend to be the most popular right now. But if you go here, there's an opportunity to see more. Looks like there's about 28, 29 magazines already about genealogy.
And this is under the kind of banner in the results called Flipboard.
Correct.
And it says magazines. So that's really, okay, I hadn't noticed where it said magazines before. So this section of the results list are actual magazines. We can subscribe. How do we do that?
Yeah, to subscribe to a magazine, you open the magazine and you'll see at the top left of almost every page sort of an icon that looks like a ribbon and the word subscribe. And you just tap that, and then it becomes basically something that you follow within Flipboard.
So if I've created my magazine, I've got to get it out there to the mason jar mania people out there. It's just got to happen. How do I share my magazine with other people or my family tree magazine?
Yeah, the one of the most effective ways to do it right now is to share it through your existing social networks. So the magazines do have a unique URL.
They do.
Yes.
How do we find that?
If you go to the cover of the magazine, you'll see of every magazine, whether it's your magazine or somebody else's magazine. We're just waiting for one to load here. You'll see a share button. You tap the share button, and you have a bunch of choices. You can share it on email. You could share it via message. You could share it on whatever social networks you're connected to, because Flipboard integrates those networks, so we can also share into them. So you can, from Flipboard, you can tweet, you can post to Facebook, you can post to LinkedIn, you can post to Google+, whatever networks you use, we probably already connect with them.
And you can copy this link. So
and there's a copy link.
On your website or whatever.
Now, here's the other really, really neat thing, and this is where, again, we're starting to move more from the world of being an app into the world of being the web, is that one thing that is visible on the web right now are magazines. Mm-hmm. So if you put that URL into a tweet, or you even send it an email, put it on your blog, tattoo it on your shoulder, whatever you decide to do, that URL is people can use it without having to download the app. So they can see your magazine on the web. The magazine still feels like Flipboard. It still renders like a magazine. You flip it side to side like you do with Flipboard and like you do with a magazine. But there's no requirement that the person who's doing that has Flipboard installed. And
okay, so two selfish questions. One, can I have a vanity URL? Flipboard Lisa Louise Cooke's magazine. Can we have some kind of a vanity URL?
No, you can't have, not yet. We can't no magazine vanity URLs for the magazines, but
or our entire account, so we could share our entire magazine.
There you go. So that you beat me to it. One thing you do have though is we've also enabled users' profile pages with links to all their magazines via the web. So everybody's profile page is basically flipboard.com/ your vanity username, whatever that is.
Which makes it very easy to then just tell somebody off the top of your head. And the second, of course, question would be, I'm thinking about bloggers out there. Is it going to be possible to be able to have embed code? So we could embed a little widget where they literally are reviewing our magazine right there on our blog post.
Yeah, that's a very common request. We're not there right now, but we do plan to end up there before too long.
Good. Okay, put it on your wish list. We're asking for it. Okay, what else have we got here? We shared our magazine. How can my magazine get found and noticed? Certainly sounds like the sharing options you talked about from the magazine cover, the way to do that. Any best practices that you can recommend for maintaining your magazine, keeping it fresh? I think one question people will have is there's RSS feeds, which deliver new content as it's posted. So our magazine, to a certain extent, is updating. But we can also, in a sense, flip individual articles, can we not? So what do you recommend?
Yeah, so just to clarify, one of the things you just pointed out is not quite there yet. So there is no capability yet, although, again, this is another thing that we're going to work on, the ability to automatically add content from a source to your magazine. So the
RSS feed is not delivering the most current, it's not updating those posts? It's just whatever post we were on at the time we flipped it?
Correct. It's not automatically adding those things. And again, I'm in the same position as you personally. I run a blog. I do a blog for my neighborhood that effectively is like a neighborhood newspaper, and I'm using it just like you. I have a blog, but I also have a Twitter presence, and I have a Facebook presence, and there's all sorts of people in the neighborhood who are saying things about the neighborhood. The magazine has been a fantastic place for me to bring all that together in one place, even more so than the blog. But the backbone of the whole thing is the blog itself. But at this point, I still manually add the blog content to the magazine. But that will change.
That also then proposes the question of issues.
Right. So one of the interesting things about magazines that we're seeing is that there is no one way people use them. And some people think of them as just kind of like a running stream of stuff. You have a subject that you're interested in. I'm personally a bit of an airplane geek, so I have some magazines that are about airplanes. And for me, it's just, this is a very interesting airplane thing. I just send it to my airplane magazine. Other people do tend to think of them as issues, as very discrete entities. We have some
updated over time.
Well, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes some people do treat them as something that's updated over time. Again, my neighborhood blog is just kind of a running sort of news thing. It's sort of always going and always being added to. But there are some people and there's some news organizations who really do tend to think of them as issues. So what they'll do is some people will manually, using the web tool, one day a week they'll delete everything that's in it, add a whole new slate of content and say this is sort of most of those tend to be things they're thinking of them as a news digest. So this is the news digest for the week of insert date here. That's one option. We've also found that when people create magazines around events, a conference is a great example, a family reunion is a great example, that magazine is going to have a somewhat finite period during which you add to it. You can look at it forever, but after the event, after you've collected all your photos and all the various pieces of content that you want to add to it, you've arranged them as you want, you're probably not going to add to that much going forward. So that's totally okay. That's just sort of what that magazine is trying to do. So there's different kinds of contexts. Other people use magazines just for personal collections. The magazine may be public, but they're not really thinking of it as something that they're really trying to find an audience about. So it might be, these are recipes I like, I put them all in a magazine, or I can break one for the Italian food that I like and one for vegetables or salads that I like. So there's different ways to use them, and the magazines themselves don't really physically look any different. There's not a different UI depending on the periodicity of the magazine or the function of the magazine, but it's perfectly okay to use them in any one of those ways. Now, having said all that, there are a couple things that are generally a good idea. If you are trying to maintain an audience and trying to build an audience around your magazine, a lot of the rules that people are probably familiar with from Twitter, from Facebook, from blogs, anything where you're sort of putting content out into the world and hoping that people will habituate themselves to it, a lot of those rules will apply here. It's good to add content regularly so that people not only feel like there's something new when they go look, but they also get some used to the idea that there's always something happening there, so you have to make sure you see it. There's two schools of thought on this, but we suggest often mixing up the cover image. There's two ways to think about that. A different cover image is the way to signify to a reader there's something new here, so maybe I should dive in again. Look, there's a new cover image when you see a string of covers on your Flipboard. There's other people who think, and we don't really know what the right answer is yet, to be honest, that having one image and keeping it there is a good idea because people just sort of become accustomed to an image, and as they're scanning through things, they sort of know what.
More like a book. A book cover doesn't change, but like magazines do every month.
Or like a Twitter avatar or something like that, where you sort of, something becomes known by its graphical representation. I don't think there's a right answer there. I think it really depends on what you want to do, and again, how you really see your magazine. But those are the basics. Add content regularly, mix up the cover once in a while if you think that's a good idea, and obviously spread the word about it through all the networks that you already use.
It's interesting. Well, first of all, I have to ask this question before I forget. Is there a limit to how many magazines that you can create?
Not for any functional reason, no.
Okay, so if you wanted to do individual issues on a quarterly basis or something, you could. And you could just create it as a new magazine. And if you wanted to keep an archival version of what the first one you ever did was.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. You could do that. You could just keep creating a magazine a week if you wanted, a magazine a quarter, a magazine a year, whatever you want. You could just create one and treat that as an issue. And again, we're seeing some people doing that. That's definitely happening.
Well, it's interesting. I realize I walked in here with a false idea, which is as a podcaster, I deliver content through RSS feed. And so there's an ongoing delivery, but there's also an archival element to it. And I assumed because we were looking at RSS feeds and adding them, that we were adding them to our magazine, that they were updating. And they're not. So it's more of a stagnant piece. Would love to see that updatable capability. That would be amazing. But also, it makes us then have new ways to think about maybe how we do want to manage the magazines, knowing that they're not updating on their own. We have to be a little more hands-on to make sure it's staying fresh and interesting. Or it could, like you say, stand alone as an archival piece. This is where I was at this time, and this is, what I was trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Happily, adding things to a magazine is a very fast process.
Yes.
I run a neighborhood blog. The blog tends to have 2 to 3 posts a day. Right now we don't have the ability for those to automatically end up in that magazine. But having said that, the task of adding those things to the magazine takes about 30 seconds, 30 seconds a day. So it's not really, yes, it's something I have to remember to do, but it's not time consuming unto itself.
Well, to me, it's an exciting idea that you could actually build, in a sense, your family history in this. And while we blog, not every blog post is necessarily about the family. It's about other things we're doing. So you could then grab just those to build together this one story. Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. I appreciate it and appreciate being on the Genealogy Gems podcast. I really enjoyed heading over to their offices and just seeing a startup like Flipboard in action and how far they've come. They've got a lot of folks working on the app and the web tools they have for the magazine. It's very cool. Now, I know this is an audio show, and you got to see this in action to really appreciate what we're talking about here. So head to the show notes. Here's how we do it. You go to genealogygems.com, hover your mouse over podcast, and select the Genealogy Gems podcast, and follow the links to episode number 163. That's this episode, and in those show notes, I've got all the information that we talked about, including links to those free magazines I've created that I told you about. I've got one on using historic maps for genealogy. There's one for newspapers in genealogy. And then, of course, there is the Roots Tech 2014 app that's available to everyone for free. And again, you can view the magazines on in your web browser if you don't have a mobile device. But if you do have a mobile device, I really recommend downloading the free Flipboard app, because that is the best way to experience all of the great content in the magazines. And it's a way to get started adding your own RSS feeds to your favorite genealogy blogs and videos and even podcasts. And a great way to replace iGoogle, which of course we all miss greatly. But I have to say, for keeping up on great genealogy content online, Flipboard absolutely bypasses iGoogle. It is a beautiful way to take advantage of all that content. It can be a little bit challenging just to kind of get used to the interface at first with the app, and stay tuned because we'll have more info in the newsletter and upcoming episodes helping you kind of walk your way through that. I think I'm going to put some videos together as well. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we should have a class for all of you premium members on video coming up here shortly, next month or so. That's really intensive on Flipboard. But you don't need a whole class just to get started. So go check it out today. Head to the show notes, episode 163, and start downloading. Have fun. Thank you so much for joining me for this first episode of 2014 of the Genealogy Gems Podcast, episode number 163. It has flown by. We have flipped out for Flipboard. You've got a lot on your plate now to do. But this is a great way to start the new year. Get out there, get a hold of this new app, and start putting in that content, those blogs, those videos, this podcast, all the stuff that's going to help support you and inspire you for the coming year to achieve your family history goals. And, even when we don't have time in our busy lives necessarily at certain points during the year to do the actual work of genealogy research itself, it's nice to stay connected. And I certainly appreciate that you continue to tune into this show. And if you enjoyed that interview and learning about Flipboard, I've got more for all of you who are Genealogy Gems premium members. And if you're not a member, might be a really good time to think about becoming one, because we've got some great stuff coming down the pipeline for 2014, some really cool new videos. And as I said, in our next premium episode, I'm going to have the extended version of this interview. Another, 15, 20 minutes we spent talking about some of the fine details and things on how to really get the most out of using Flipboard. So you can check that out in the upcoming episode of Premium Podcast. And if you'd like to become a Genealogy Gems premium member, we'd love to have you. We have a great time. It is just $29.95 for the whole year. And that includes the entire back catalog of over 100 premium podcast episodes, over a dozen of my video classes, and ongoing video series like Evernote for Genealogy, and new stuff every single month. Also, wanted to let you know we ran a little special over the holidays, and it looks like we're going to be able to continue to offer for a little while longer the free ebook deal. The folks at Family Tree Magazine got together and they put together a terrific ebook. It's 23 pages packed with some of my most popular articles from Family Tree Magazine. Stuff like family history freebies, on assignment, learning how to do family history interviews. We did undercover genealogy. And we also had an article in there on using the David Rumsey map collection, which is fantastic. So lots of great stuff. That is a free ebook that you get as an automatic download for a limited time. And this we're recording in January of 2014 for that limited time. I'm not sure how long we'll have the ebook, but it's 23 pages filled with innovative and usable ideas that you can use right away in your research. And that's a free download when you become a member now. And I don't know how long it's going to be out there and available to us, so take advantage of it now while you're listening to this episode. You can go to genealogygems.com. You can click on the link in the center column on the home page where it says Genealogy Gems Premium Membership. There's an orange link that says Sign Up Now. You could also head into the store, and we've got it there as well with all the details on that free ebook. If you have any questions or comments, get a hold of me at genealogygemspodcast@gmail.com or at the voicemail line 925-272-4021. Thank you so much for listening, friend. I'll talk to you soon.